Okay, good evening and welcome to the meeting of the October 7th, 2024 of the Arlington County Planning Commission. I am Commissioner Peterson, Vice Chair. Tonight, the Commission will consider the following items: zoning ordinance for non-conforming townhouses and multifamily buildings, a zoning ordinance for recovery residences. Before we begin, I would like to share a few logistical points for all participants joining the meeting remotely and in person. For presenters and speakers joining us through Microsoft Teams, please keep your phones and other electronic devices muted until you are called upon by the clerk. Please turn off the sound to any devices around you to minimize interference. Please keep your cameras off until the clerk announces your name to speak. When called upon, you must unmute yourself by clicking the microphone icon that is in the meeting command bar at the top of the screen. The moderator nor the clerk have the ability to unmute your mic. Once you have spoken, please mute your mics and turn your cameras off. If you are dialing in by phone to join the meeting, please press *6 to unmute. Public speakers will be called upon by the clerk at an assigned time. Pre-registration and email confirmation to speak at tonight's hearing was required. We are not able to accommodate additional speakers. All speakers, virtual or hybrid, will receive 2 minutes to comment as an individual. Only representatives of a county board appointed advisory group, committee, and/or commission will receive 3 minutes to comment. A timer will be displayed on the screen if speaking virtually, and speakers in person will follow the timer stationed at the podium. Audio of tonight's meeting is available via phone. If commissioners, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity, please reconnect by phone. However, if you are dialing in by phone and unable to see the screen, we will provide you an audible 30-second warning to wrap up your comments. You will be muted when your time has expired. The meeting chat is active for presenters or commissioners who need technical assistance only. Please do not use the meeting chat for discussion, public comment, questions about agenda items, or requests for further information. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. Tonight's meeting will be available for review through the YouTube and Microsoft Teams platforms in real time. The links have been provided on the Planning Commission website. The meetings will also be available for review with closed captioning on Comcast Xfinity channels 25 and 1085. Verizon Fios channels 39 and 40, 24 to 48 hours after the adjournment of the meeting. Lastly, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website via a link to YouTube as stated. All information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. Madam Clerk, can you please call the first item?
Thank you. Our first item tonight is ZOA-2024-07, an ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify Section 16.2 of the Arlington County Zoning Ordinance to enable interior structural alterations in non-conforming townhouses and multifamily buildings, and it goes on to mention window wells and basements, etc. We have Emily Garrett to present this item from our Planning Division this evening.
Great, thank you. Let's see, get this presentation up. Great, so as Giselle said, my name is Emily Garrett. I'm accompanied by Matt Ladd. We're in the Planning Division of CPHD, and today we'll be discussing a zoning ordinance amendment regarding non-conforming townhouse and multifamily dwellings. So the objective of this zoning ordinance amendment is to allow by right improvements to non-conforming townhouse and multifamily properties in the RA and RG7 districts without needing Board of Zoning Appeals approval. This would include interior structural alterations and limited additions, including creation of window wells for basement egress, exterior stairs, ramps, and decks. This would alleviate the burden of pursuing BZA approval for certain home improvements and provide homeowners in Arlington and other communities where there has been an increase in number of BZA variance requests with flexibility to invest in their properties and better accommodate household needs. So these are two examples of exterior structural alterations that would be permitted by right. On the left is an example of basement egress windows, which is required to convert basement space into bedroom space and provide a safe means of escape or entry in case of a house fire or other emergencies. On the right is an example of a ramp, which would allow for those with disabilities to safely enter and exit the unit. And then interior structure alterations frequently heard include removing walls separating the kitchen from the dining room and finishing attics. So to provide some background, the zoning ordinance requires that non-conforming buildings and structures be brought into conformance before structural, interior alterations, building additions, and expansion may be permitted. A building can be non-conforming if it does not meet setback, building separation, density, building height, or parking requirements. This conflicts with goals for preservation of older buildings that may have cultural or historic value or provide lower cost living options. Furthermore, the zoning ordinance provides flexibility for non-conforming 1- and 2-family dwellings, but not townhouse or multifamily properties. So we don't have data on non-conforming buildings, so our analysis focused on location of townhouse and multifamily properties developed by right in the RA and R27 districts. These units are more likely to be non-conforming since they are older and built prior to the adoption of stricter zoning standards. There are 1,622 townhomes and 29,043 multifamily units developed by right in these districts. And as you can see on the map, these units are spread throughout the county along Columbia Pike and Langston Boulevard, and in Fairlington, Arlington Village, Buckingham, Pentagon City, and other communities. This map also shows census tracts that have a greater percent of persons of color and cost burden households than the county average. So this brings us to our equity considerations and who could benefit and be burdened by the zoning ordinance amendment. These units are located in census tracts with more people of color and cost burden households than the county average. They also make up 26% of CAFs and 55% of marks countywide. Homeowners could benefit from increased flexibility to invest in their properties, build wealth, and better accommodate household needs, while also saving time and money by not having to pursue a BZA variance. Renters could be burdened by increased rents and risk of displacement, but could also benefit from improved living situations. Ultimately, these risks already exist under the status quo with homeowners' ability to make non-structural interior improvements, and these rent increases are also likely to be more modest compared to rent in a newly constructed building. So our approach includes 2 zoning text amendments to section 16.2. The first is added text to repairs and alterations to allow interior repairs and alterations, whether structural or non-structural, to existing non-conforming townhouses and multifamily dwellings in the R27 and RA districts. The second is added text to exceptions to allow addition or expansion of window wells, areaways, decks, ramps, and steps to existing non-conforming townhouse or multifamily dwellings located in the R27 and RA districts. So we pursued various avenues to engage with the community. This included going to ZOCO in July and the Housing and Tenant Landlord Commissions in September. We also held a virtual lunch and learn and had an online feedback forum open for 6 weeks. Through this engagement, no concerns were raised, and we received a lot of support on the amendment. So the County Board approved the RTA in September, and hopefully with your recommendation, we'll take final action on October 19th. So our recommendation to the County Board is to adopt the attached ordinance as shown in attachment 1 in the staff report to amend, reenact, and recodify section 16.2. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
No. Yes.
People are missing my humor by not having my mic on. That's on me. Okay, was this matter heard, I'm imagining, by Zoko? Okay, so is there a report from Zoko?
I'll defer to Commissioner Striner.
Commissioner Striner, you have the floor.
Yeah, so I chaired this one while Leo was out, and basically it was everything. Sorry, what the staff report had said. It's a way to avoid putting these building owners that have these sort of non-conforming units that are older, not necessarily conforming with a lot of our current day standards, from having to go through approvals and permits and zoning appeals, all these sorts of things. It's a way of having them make repairs in a speedier way so that they're able to keep their buildings in a state of good repair over time. And the idea is, in addition to that, something that we teased out of the discussion was that it avoids these building owners having to sell prematurely. They can get more use and more life out of these buildings before potentially they get redeveloped and built from the ground up all over again. So really a lot of what was covered in the staff presentation, but there weren't really a lot of objections to this. This one was pretty held and discussed in a pretty quick amount of time. And I imagine we'll have a similar length of discussion here tonight.
I look forward to that. Great. Any other commission? Nope, subcommittees. Okay, great. Thank you very much for the presentation. The matter is now with the Planning Commission. We've heard the Zoko report from Commissioner Striner. I don't know that it's necessary to come up with topics for our discussion here. Okay, so we'll just do open response. I'm seeing Commissioner Lantelmi, so you're up first, and then we'll go through any other commissioners that wish to be heard in the item. Thank you.
All right, I just want to remind my fellow commissioners that this is something we saw actually a few years ago when the same issue came up before us for I believe it was for the R districts for non-conforming lots. And we were very enthusiastic then about moving ahead and voted unanimously to do that. And we wanted this to happen. I think part of the discussion was, and let's do this for the other zones too. So I'm thrilled to see this here, and I will be definitely voting in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantelmi. I saw Commissioner Berkey.
Sure. I just have a couple stray thoughts since I wasn't able to make it. SoCo. I'm also very excited about this. Just a couple thoughts I want to provide. I think it's always important for us to incentivize property owners to do good things, right, and not to just worry about the whole focus being about, well, if we let them do this and they may do this. Like, it's important to incentivize upkeep and maintenance. And obviously, this is not only about Fairlington, but obviously Fairlington came up a lot during ZoCo. Great meeting, by the way, that you chaired. I got to watch it. And so
Thank you.
when we're at a moment where we're struggling to provide sufficient, housing options for families, and we have Fairlingtons and we need more of them, I think it's really great and important that we do more to provide flexibility for folks to stay there if that's what's going to work for them. A couple other stray thoughts. I really like the analysis on pages 4 and 5 that you all did in the staff report, explaining why you didn't go into further kind of expansion, through the zoning ordinance. I think it's really great, and we hear from the public sometimes frustrated about zoning discussions, things like that. I think this is a great example to show, you're showing your work, and I think it's very transparent and helpful. And I agree with your line of thinking. And then the last quick comment is I also appreciate the equity analysis you did in there, because I think a lot of times we think about this again, it's like, well, if we do this, there's going to be increased rents. We're thinking about displacement. And what I really appreciated is that you thought about displacement, not just in the context of this change, but in the counterfactual of the status quo. What happens if we don't do this? Does that, place pressure upon folks who are renters, for whom their property owners may end up choosing redevelopment instead of being able to renovate, and keep existing structures. So I think we're giving more options, and in a lot of ways, this likely will help renters. So those were my straight comments, but I really appreciate this, and we'll be happy to support a motion.
I will recognize myself. I think this is, as Commissioner Lynn told me, stated something we've been looking forward to. A change that we are, as a commission, I think we're very supportive of, and something that, really truly has benefit to homeowners. And I appreciated that you kind of illustrated, who some of those homeowners who are most likely to be impacted by the current restrictions may be. And I think it's something that, certainly we should take advantage of, making those zoning adjustments where we can, where really there's a lot of benefit, and I'm not really seeing any downside. So yay. Any other commissioners wishing to be heard? Otherwise, I will look for a motion, and I will look to Commissioner Streiner to make that motion, should he not yet realize that.
I do not realize that. Can someone pull it up real quick?
I have it in front of me if you want me to.
Thank you, Leo.
Okay, Commissioner Sarli, please make the motion.
Thank you. I recommend that the planning how does that go again? I recommend that the planning commission advise the county board to adopt the attached ordinance as shown in attachment 1 to amend, reenact, and codify section. Let me make sure I'm on the right one. Yes. Enable section. I'll start again. I recommend that the planning commission advise the county board to adopt the attached ordinance as shown in attachment 1 to amend, reenact, and recodify section 16.2 of the Arlington County zoning ordinance to enable interior structural alterations in non-conforming townhouses and multifamily buildings in the RA 14-26, RA 8-18, RA 7-16, RA 6-15, and RA 2-7 zoning districts, and B, enable limited additions for window wells for basement egress areaways, exterior stairs, ramps, and decks in non-conforming townhouses and multifamily buildings in the RA 14-26, R 8-18, R 8-7-16, R 8-6-15, and R 2-7 zoning districts.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second. Yeah, second.
I'm going to give it to Commissioner Streiner on that one, since I felt like he really wanted it. Any further discussion? Okay, we are moving to a vote. Commissioner Streiner?
Aye.
Commissioner Bagley?
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
Commissioner Weir?
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Aye.
Commissioner Berkey?
Aye.
Commissioner Sarli?
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger also votes aye. I don't believe we have anyone virtual, correct, Madam Clerk? Okay, therefore the vote passes by a vote of 8-0. Thank you all very much. Appreciate that. We did that one in 19 minutes.
Our next item is ZOA-2024-05. This is an ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify specific zoning ordinances regarding the recovery residents. We have Debbie Albert and we have Cliff Hogan from our zoning office to present this item this evening.
Thank you very much. This is the item I believe we heard. Wait, we didn't have a, no, it was last month. Sorry, I got my months confused. We don't meet in August, but we do meet in September. So we did hear this item initially last month, and I know that there were some follow-up questions from commissioners, and so we kind of, the motion was to come back for this month so that we could hear some new items. So again, we're looking forward to sort of hearing the follow-up on that. We did hear the item last month in great detail, so we're hoping to kind of hear answers to really some of our questions with regards to, I believe, was enforcement in particular that we had some questions about, and sort of what the experience has been, in the communities where some of these homes are located, and sort of what the enforcement pieces look like there. So I think that we'll focus on the items we had questions on from last month. And I'm anticipating that that's what the presentation will hit on. So, okay, thank you. And whenever you're ready, thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Debbie Albert with the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development and Zoning Division. I'm here with Cliff Hogan, also with the Zoning Division, and we are also joined virtually by Suzanne Somerville with our Department of Human Services. I think she's. As the Planning Commission heard this item in September, I'm going to start with just a really quick overview of the proposed amendment and how we got here. And then we'll launch right into some of the requests for additional information from the September hearing. As a refresher, the proposed zoning ordinance amendment, slide. As a refresher, the proposed zoning ordinance amendment would define recovery residence consistent with the definition in the Code of Virginia, and it would allow the use by right in single-family dwellings for up to 8 people, and subject to use permit approval in all other dwelling types and or for more than 8 people. As you'll recall, the study was triggered by a reasonable accommodation request from Oxford House under the Fair Housing Act as a result of a zoning complaint investigation. The amendment, as proposed by staff, is designed to provide the same access to single-family dwellings to residents in recovery from substance abuse disorders. In certified recovery residences, as that already allowed for residents with mental illness, intellectual or developmental disability in licensed residential facilities. It's also designed to complement services that the county provides through the Department of Human Services and the Community Services Board for persons challenged by mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance use disorder, recognizing that 40% of the population served by the Community Services Board in the last fiscal year identified as having a substance abuse disorder. It's designed to be consistent with the definition of recovery residence in the Code of Virginia. And finally, it is designed to provide an interim step in broadening the definition of family with a narrow scope to meet the reasonable accommodation request in the short term without presupposing the outcome of a future study, a future plan zoning study. I just wanted to provide one correction to the staff report. We learned late Friday afternoon. There's a table in the staff report that compares how our peer jurisdictions regulate this use. We learned late Friday afternoon that Fairfax County, while their ordinance requires a use permit for groups of more than 4 people, there is an interpretation by the zoning administrator that does allow recovery residences for up to 8 people by right. So similar to how we're proposing here, except we would be amending our ordinance to allow that. So I just wanted to make that correction. At your September hearing and also through the outreach process, we heard a lot of questions about how people can report issues that they have with any of their neighbors. And this is any neighbors, not just recovery residences, but some of those issues were related to behavior, related to occupancy, parking, property maintenance, as well as safety and security. Not all of those issues are things that we try to regulate or enforce under the zoning ordinance. So on this slide, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do regulate under zoning and how they are and are not incorporated into the proposed amendment. Through zoning, we regulate occupancy under our definition of family. Note that's different from maximum occupancy limits enforced under the building code for safety, life and safety reasons. That's addressed in the proposed amendment with the allowance for up to 8 residents by right in a recovery residence, similar to how other designated groups of 8 are allowed in the county. We also regulate use under the zoning ordinance. The proposed amendment defines a new use for recovery residence that is consistent with that definition in Virginia code. We regulate off-street parking, number of spaces under zoning. There is no additional parking requirement proposed with the proposed amendment. Staff believes that car ownership for residents and recovery residences would be, or to the houses, would be similar to that for the average single family house. You can see on the slide there that the average single family house has 2.05 cars. The average of the 6 recovery residences in the county, they have 2.6 cars on average with a range of 1 to 4 across the 6 houses. And then finally, under zoning, we regulate, as you're aware, the physical characteristics of the built environment. That's not really relevant to the proposed amendment because it doesn't propose any new development. Some of those issues, however, that we heard during outreach are issues that are enforced by other codes. What you're going to see on the next 2 slides are common complaints that occur in neighborhoods that are responded to and enforced through other county codes or services that are, however, often in collaboration with zoning, as issues caused by humans don't fit neatly into just one code. Some examples, the building code, for example, work without a permit, the care of property ordinance, for example, an overgrown lawn, noise ordinance violations during business hours are enforced by our Inspection Services Division. Our Department of Environmental Services addresses issues related to obstructions in the public right-of-way or anything related to curbside collection. So if carts are out during the wrong time, for example. The Department of Environmental Services also administers the residential parking permit program, which is something a neighborhood could optionally pursue if they believe visitor parking is taking up too much curbside space in the neighborhood, which is another concern we heard as part of the outreach process. Police and fire respond to emergencies, and police also enforce on-street parking rules. Police also respond to noise ordinance violations. They work in collaboration with our Inspection Services Division, responding to noise violations that are before or after business hours. Our Environmental Health Division and the Department of Human Services responds to and addresses rodent complaints. And then finally, recovery residents occupants might be subject to additional reporting and accountability if they are receiving rental assistance from the county. They may be required to participate in county programs. And if they are subject to parole, they would also be subject to either behavioral health court or recovery county, which is formerly known as drug court. Recovery county would include drug screenings. The particular program as part of a parole would be specific to the type of reason that they were on parole. We also want to be responsive to the requests for additional information on police service calls at existing recovery residences across the county. I'm not going to go through all of the statistics on the slide, but just to let you know what you're looking at, we pulled data for the 6 Oxford houses that are currently existing in the county, as well as 6 of the county's mental health residents with fewer than 8 residents. Remembering that this is the use we believe the proposed use is most similar to, and staff believes that these data and the similarity of the number of calls supports staff's recommendation to treat the 2 uses, the 2 types of groups with fewer than 8 and in a similar manner in the zoning ordinance. I will note on this slide that we do expect an increased volume of calls for both of these populations as compared to the average single family home due to the existence of comorbidities and mental health issues related to the individual's individual disability. We also expect to see differences in the types of services needed on these calls across these two groups that are shown here due to the differences in a substance use disability versus a developmental or mental illness disability. As you can see from the previous several slides, county agencies have to collaborate to resolve a range of issues because there's often overlap, for example, between care of property and rodents, or between noise ordinance enforcement that happens during the day or at night, or between zoning and building. There are often commonalities, etc. In advance of the county board considering this amendment, staff did convene an initial interdepartmental group, including people responsible for regulating and enforcing the range of issues I just discussed. The purpose of this internal meeting was to just begin a dialogue amongst staff in the county to ensure that staff are educated on the proposed use so that they can appropriately elevate and collaborate on issues or complaints related to these properties. Lastly, we want to give you an update on what we've heard from advisory groups and commissions, shown here in reverse chronological order. The Community Service Board provided a letter to the County Board last week in support of the proposed amendment, also affirming that recovery residences are an important element of the continuum of care for people in recovery as they transition from treatment settings, and also affirming the urgent need for housing during that transitional period. The Housing Commission met on September 5th, where they expressed, for an information item, where they expressed support for the proposed amendment. And in addition, staff will attend their October 7th meeting this coming Thursday to respond to questions and answers per their request to aid them in drafting a letter in support of the proposed amendment to the county board. And then finally, the Disabilities Advisory Commission heard the proposed amendment as an information item back in July, where they also expressed support for the proposed amendment. We did not receive, nor did we expect, a letter from that commission. And I will leave you with just reiterating staff's recommendation is that the county board adopt the proposed amendment as presented in the staff report. I'll leave this slide here, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you. Our chair had to step out for a minute. Do we have public comment, please?
We have 4 speakers this evening. 2 are virtual and 2 are in person. I will be calling the virtual speakers first. Please listen to your name and turn your cameras on if you wish. The first speaker is Susan McClanahan, followed by Thomas Gargan.
Okay, and our public speaker can start.
Great, thanks everyone. Hi, my name is Susie McClanahan. I'm the Senior for Housing Rights Program Manager at the Equal Rights Center. The ERC is a civil rights organization that identifies and seeks to eliminate unlawful and unfair discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations in its home community of Greater Washington, D.C., including Arlington County and nationwide. The ERC appreciates the opportunity to testify in support of this zoning amendment because it would improve access to housing for Arlington residents with addiction-related disabilities, promote community integration for such residents, and align with the county's obligations to affirmatively further fair housing, or AFFH. While I summarize our support during my time here, I'd encourage you to read the ERC's written testimony as it explains each of these points in further detail. First, we are concerned that the current ordinance's undue restrictions on recovery residences could potentially constitute disability discrimination under the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. Arlington County's proposed zoning amendment appropriately addresses the underlying zoning policy that could otherwise result in unnecessary and potentially illegal housing barriers for people with addiction-related disabilities. Second, the landmark 1999 Supreme Court decision in Olmsted that held that community segregation of people with disabilities constitutes disability discrimination under the ADA. Passage of this amendment aligns with the Olmsted mandate because the legislation reduces the burdensome restrictions and uncertainty facing operators of recovery residences. And third, as a recipient of HUD funding, Arlington County has an obligation under the Fair Housing Act to affirmatively further fair housing. This means that the county must proactively take meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation, promote fair housing choice, eliminate disparities in opportunity, and foster inclusive communities free from discrimination. The recently published Regional Fair Housing Plan found that the lack of assistance for transitioning from institutional settings to integrated housing contributes to local segregation of persons with disabilities. Passage of this amendment would thus be aligned with Arlington County's AFFH obligations. Thank you for the opportunity to comment in support of this proposed amendment.
Thank you. Second virtual speaker, is that how we want to do this?
Our second virtual speaker is Thomas Gargan.
Thank you. Speaking for myself and my fellow members of the Ballston Village Homeowners Association, we are strongly opposed to the zoning text amendment in its current form, as it still does not include the modest request for a limitation on proximity that our community requested. As the staff knows, there are 2 recovery residences located side by side on the 1100 block of North Stewart Street that prompted this zoning change request from Oxford House when zoning enforcement received complaints more than 2 years ago that still haven't been addressed. We've learned that a third house abutting the 2 existing recovery houses, which is owned by the same landlord, will be available for lease soon, which means there is a very real possibility that a third recovery residence could be added to the same block. The staff's report reads like an advocacy piece for Oxford House and only makes one passing acknowledgement that the community has requested a modest limitation on proximity. The staff asserts that the Fair Housing Act requires this amendment, but a limitation that is facially neutral is permissible. For example, a limitation that no single-family home with more than 6 residents may be located within 600 feet of another single-family home with more than 6 residents is absolutely permissible. The The Fair Housing Act then requires an accommodation for persons with handicaps if the accommodation is reasonable and necessary to afford handicapped persons equal opportunity to use and enjoying housing. In this case, it is absolutely not reasonable or necessary for 2, let alone 3 recovery houses to be located side by side as they operate independently throughout the country without neighboring other houses. So again, we would ask that the Planning Commission reject this and again, consider the very modest request for a reasonable limitation on the number of recovery residences that can be on a single block.
Thank you, sir. That your time is up. Thank you.
Our next 2 speakers in person are Terry Armayo and Sonia Cool.
No, there's a button you need to, yeah. Nope, not yet. Nope,
Hello?
yes, light, you're good.
Hello? Oh, I agree so much with what the previous speaker just said. So the staff report does gloss over a lot of the problems, and it does read like an advocacy piece. I've spent a lot of time since July when I first heard about this. And I have to say, I've dug up a lot of my own research, and a lot of it came from Oxford House. But Oxford House themselves says they can operate with 4 to 8 people in a house, and yet we're just blanketly saying 8. And so the Virginia General Assembly hasn't said 8 yet. This whole process is a little bit premature as to where we're going with this and the rapidity of where we're going, especially in light that last week the county board just initialized the sober homes to even be considered. So I'm even asking if this is a little premature. It seems like it to me, as nobody knows about this still. So 3 of the current 6 Oxford houses that we know of, and I looked at the report today on the staff report, all 6 Oxford houses have multiple complaints. And they're of every nature. But last time when Thomas Gargan testified in front of the county board, he testified that they carried a dead body out of the house during the daylight and kids are walking by. And that the kids were afraid to walk by the house because they are getting harassed by the 16 men sitting outside harassing the girls. I don't think this is something that we need to jump both feet first. I think we need to definitely allow the use because we have to meet the fair housing requirement to allow the use. I agree with that. I think we ought to start with 4. And then if more are needed for whatever reason, financial, they can go and do a use permit from the county board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I need to press any of these buttons? Okay. Okay. So to begin, I want to make clear that I am not here to argue against the existence of recovery houses. I just want to recognize, I do recognize that they have a vital role, but I have reservations about it. So what I do advocate for is the sensible limitation of recovery houses to no more than 4 unrelated people in a household. This isn't about denying anyone the opportunity for recovery, but it is about creating a balance that ensures the safety and the stability of our neighborhoods. Allowing 8 or more people to reside in a single family home without restrictions eliminates a critical failsafe that would help to maintain the integrity of the community. So these limitations allow for oversight. It allows for ensuring that recovery houses remain a positive influence and not to spiral into environments that might foster chaos or neglect. Okay, so the safety of our families is what I'm primarily concerned with. When proper regulations are not enforced, unregulated recovery houses can undermine the trust and safety that our community has worked so hard to build up. Now, to be clear, this isn't about opposition to the houses. I mean, I believe that we need to meet the requirement for the fair housing. And given that there are already for allowed, I believe that that requirement has been met. I just want to be able to have some control over this by allowing these fail safes to maintain. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, so could you turn off the mic? Thank you. Or thank you. Thank you. I believe that was our last public speaker. Okay. Thank you very much. Reminding myself from last month, this was heard by ZOCO. Yes.
So I had a conversation with the ZOCO chair
Mhm.
and staff, and so our feeling on this is essentially, and staff did a really great job, and I want to thank them for the presentation, was to establish a little bit of clarity of what the role of ZOCO is in this conversation. And it seems like, to a large extent, the issues being brought to the fore are enforcement and oversight, not particularly in the purview of ZOCO. So that, I think, didn't warrant another ZOCO meeting since the September meeting. So that was the decision point there. Other than that, I think I was hoping that we would have a rep from Oxford House and folks from DHS, which I think they are here. Is that correct?
Suzanne Somerville is here from DHS.
Perfect.
Oxford House is not
To
here.
provide us with
That
a
we're
little
aware
bit
of.
more of intel on how we can better police and respond to some of the concerns from the citizens. Thanks.
Question just to follow up on that, with regards to Oxford House being present, was they were given the opportunity and were not available, or I just want to better understand that.
They were given the opportunity.
Okay.
They're not here.
Okay, understood. And Oxford House is the only provider of these communities in Arlington?
In Arlington currently.
In Arlington currently.
There are
Okay.
2 credentialing agencies that could be allowed under the proposed ordinance.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay. So I think that as far as kind of, the matter is now with the Planning Commission. So I think that the way that I want to sort of think through this, Commissioner Sarli, is there a reason to sort of, if we were going to chunk this into topics, what would you recommend, or is there not a substantial benefit to that in your opinion? Doesn't mean I'm going to take your opinion, but I want to hear your opinion.
Thank you. I think, again, and I seek the assistance of the commission on defining this, but staff put a particular slide on there that talks about how ZOCO covers the areas of occupancy, use, and parking, right? And so I think our conversation should be centered on that. I think going forward, I guess the thinking is this the right tool, right, to seek remedies for the disruptive nature of some of these homes and the way they're being managed? So I've been really struggling with this because there is a legitimate complaint here and there's some real issues. I think the only issue that I heard that is zoning related is the distance between the homes. I think that is something that we could discuss within the purview of ZOCO. The separation between the homes. I think the issues of like EMS or phone calls or noise, I don't know that we have any say on that matter. So I think as far as the discussion in the Planning Commission goes, we need to be a little bit aware that if we want some other commissions or committees to take up this, we need to ask them. But I don't know that ZOCO can sort of solve, if that makes sense.
Okay, no, I agree with that. Madam Clerk, did any other commissions provide a letter on this? And I apologize for not knowing that information at the tip of my
There's a
fingers.
letter, there's a letter in the report. Is that from a commission, Cliff?
Community services.
Community Services Board.
Yes,
So
it's
letter and
attached
stuff.
to
Okay, we
that.
didn't hear anything from housing or anything.
Housing Commission will meet again on Thursday.
Meeting again on
They've
Thursday.
asked, they met last month as an information item where they
Okay.
did not provide a letter, but they plan to provide a letter in support.
In support. Okay,
They-
they've indicated they plan to provide a letter in
have.
support. Okay, that's helpful information. Thank you.
And that letter is on the back of your board report.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the one from the Community Services Board, not the one from housing, because the one from housing doesn't exist yet, because the meeting hasn't happened yet. Okay, got it. I'll recognize you in a moment, Commissioner Steiner. This is where my head is at, kind of topic wise. I think we do need to be careful on this issue because I think a lot of that what we are hearing is issues that are not really the purview of not only the Planning Commission, but certainly not in the confines of ZOCO where this sort of item originates and what is considered as sort of a zoning amendment type topic. So for the purposes of this evening, I think that, I want to sort of looking at this from, what we can do within the confines of the, zoning ordinances, I think needs to be the underlying structure to our conversation. I do think that there is room within that to talk about, the, as far as zoning when it comes to 8 unrelated persons, if there, is a need or an opportunity to look at fewer or more than 8 related individuals in the context of these homes. And I don't know, I think it's worth having the conversation if, commissioners are interested in it in terms of like locationally and how close these facilities can be to each other. I don't know that there's a mechanism for that. Maybe that's something, staff can, illustrate to us on whether, that is something that, how that would work functionally and what would be the basis for that. Because I'm also not sure I understand. Well, I think that could in theory, fall in within kind of the confines of ZOCO and a zoning question. I'm just not sure what the basis for that would be. So if there is information the staff would kind of provide on that, I would be curious. Those are sort of topics wise, 2 things I think we should address by this body. And then I'm interested in, hearing many other commissioners if there's other topics or other things where we can just start recognizing folks. I'm going to go to Commissioner Steiner. Do you have another topic to suggest or were you just trying to get into?
I was going to add a point that the Disability Advisory Commission was supporting this as well.
Okay, did they send a letter?
Not a letter, but the staff had mentioned that they were in support of it, correct?
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure.
So they were also,
that
okay,
was on the
correct.
record.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. That is very helpful. Okay. Topics wise, does anyone else kind of like from a genre want to kind of contribute something else to like the topic conversation? Otherwise, I will start opening this up just to other commissioners. Commissioner Weir.
I have a question, and maybe this is a function of just me missing something in what's been said, but I've heard a couple times people talk about more than 8 residents, and I'm wondering I'm hoping to get some clarity as to whether or not maybe I misheard, maybe someone misspoke, or is there a component of this that would allow administratively the approval of more than 8 unrelated residents per household?
Not administratively, but by use permit approval by the county board.
By use permit approval, and that is a county board use permit approval,
That's
not
correct.
not an administrative use permit, like in the form-based code has some options.
Correct. Yeah. All
Okay.
count. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. On the conversation, topic wise, I guess maybe I'll just ask this as my own question. We've heard some commentary on whether, 8 is some sort of magic number for unrelated folks in, a home, providing these sorts of services. It's unfortunate that Oxford House is not here to kind of speak to this because it doesn't really help us in making an understanding if like 8 is some sort of magic number and like they've, done research and, determined that this is sort of the appropriate number of people to, I don't know, do, whether it's a buddy system, whether it's small group kind of, counseling, what have you, we're sort of less at a lark for that. So ignoring the fact that, Oxford House can't speak to sort of existential, benefits of 8 as a magic number, is there some other reason that 8 is a magic number from a zoning or county policy perspective that we need to be considering?
Virginia code mandates that for developmentally disabled or mentally ill, that up to 8 adults be allowed to live by right in a single family house. And for those, that is defined as a licensed facility. The difference between that licensed facility is that, they have resident staff because the residents of those houses are there because they need support for activities of daily living. And that's the purpose of that resident. We see this use as akin to that. This is just a different disability that has different needs. It doesn't require staffing for activities of daily living. but we see it otherwise akin to that use. What we do also know about the Oxford House model is they won't even establish an Oxford House for fewer than 6 people. And that is part of the peer supported model that they use, where they do need a minimum critical mass to have that peer support.
So are all of the current, I'm recognizing myself again, are all of the current facilities in the county run by Oxford House, are they all geared towards 8, or are any of them at 6?
I don't believe any of them are at 6.
None of them are
They're all
at
at
6, so
least
they're
8.
all at least 8.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and the definition you spoke to with regards to a disability, I appreciate the, why using that as a comparison point, is a helpful starting point. I'm curious as to whether legally or otherwise that is a definition that we have to apply in this scenario as well.
It is not a definition.
It is
we
not.
have
It
to
is
find
a
out.
okay. The determination.
It is from a land use perspective, and from
Okay.
a use perspective, staff sees it as a similar
as
use.
akin. So that's the basis. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So that's okay. That's helpful. Again, Oxford House not being here for the conversation is a challenge, but it would seem that if we're moving in a by right direction, that there is potentially an opening here, not to go as low as 4 by right, but potentially 6, if that's what Oxford House has said that they could establish. And then if there was a need to then, further expand that, it's always hard to, my view is it's always harder to contract than to further expand. So I'm curious what, I guess the question for you all is, what would that look like? Or is there kind of, other than sort of definitionally the way you're applying this, is there any other concern to that approach? Thank you.
I'm gonna speak just briefly to the zoning aspect, and then maybe Suzanne Somerville wants to speak to the social services aspect from a zoning perspective. Again, kind of knowing that we have 6 of these in the county and that most of them have it, and that they all do have more than 6 people, it would be something that they would need to address. If they wanted to, they would either have to come in for a use permit, or they would have to reduce the number of people. But again, we were looking to kind of create a similar use, but I'll let Suzanne speak to some of the more social aspects of that.
Hi, yes, I'd be happy to do that. So I work in behavioral health care, and one of the areas that I work with are folks who are in recovery. And so these recovery residences are critical, particularly for folks that are just coming out of residential treatment, for example. If they have no other place to live, they really can't afford to live in Arlington. And if this is where they're from, we would have to relocate them to another jurisdiction if there were not options such as recovery residences for them to live in. Part of the reason that they look to have 6 to 8 people minimally in an Oxford House is exactly that the recovery piece of it, if you're familiar with the AANA model, it's very peer-led, peer-run. This is similar to that, where you would have people partner up. So when someone first comes into the house, they're usually assigned almost a buddy, somebody who's been there for a while that will help them make the adjustment, return to the community, find meetings to go to, and sort of monitor them to make sure that they're okay. It's very peer-led. There's somebody in the house who's identified as the house leader, who is a resident also, but they oversee what's happening in the houses. It is very much a focus that no one returns to use, so that nobody's using any substances while in the house. And if so, it's reported immediately to the outreach folks, who will then notify. I'd also like to point out that while we are focused on Oxford houses because they're the only recovery residences that are currently located in Arlington, we're very open to looking at the other types of recovery residences. We just don't have any in this jurisdiction at this point. So I'd like to just make sure that we stay focused on the fact that if we're looking at making this change, that it would include all recovery residences and not Oxford House, or at least all the ones that are credentialed through DBHDS.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And I I apologize. I was not trying to kind of unfairly single out Oxford House. I think that, obviously, as you indicated, they are the only provider currently providing the service in Arlington County. So it's easy to sort of say that, they could have sort of an outsized role in terms of sort of what next steps or sort of what happens in this hearing. And so it's sort of that's the model we have to sort of consider to a point of sort of if they say they can only do it with 6 or what have you, that, I think we need to kind of take the factual pattern that is in front of us. Okay, I appreciate my fellow commissioners indulging me to ask like 3 questions in a row. I guess that's chair's privilege. I'll have to get used to not having that in 4 months. But would other commissioners like to be heard for questions or comments? Were you trying to be acknowledged? Commissioner Sarley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, I was under the impression that we were sort of catching up with some of our neighboring jurisdictions, but it seems like you had a slightly different take on that issue tonight. Could you clarify that for us? What are the other jurisdictions doing? Are we behind them? Are we getting ahead of them? And what's the story there? If we could get some clarification on that. And then the other thing was, just to be clear, so currently they're allowed to have 4, but they are actually having more because their business model is 6 at minimum. So are we sort of rewarding essentially someone that's already sort of playing beyond the sort of outlines of what's legal? So that's a little bit of more sort of a rhetorical question that I think I'm working through a little bit myself. But if we could have a little comparison with some of our fellow jurisdictions and where they are on this by right up to 8.
Yes. So I've redisplayed the slide with the comparison of our neighboring jurisdictions. Fairfax is just in orange there because it was an error in the staff report. So there are 3 of our neighboring jurisdictions who would allow this use for up to 8 residents by right. The city of Alexandria, as recently as July, eliminated any restriction to the number of unrelated people in a dwelling. So they don't have to define a specific use. This just applies to all people in all dwellings. The city of Falls Church already allows up to 8 unrelated people in a dwelling, and Fairfax County, again, while they have a similar limit in their zoning ordinance as we have now, the zoning administrator has interpreted that this recovery residence use is similar to the developmentally disabled, mentally ill provision that's already in their zoning ordinance as well as ours, and so allows a recovery residence for up to 8 by right. James City County has actually also done the same thing. They're not one of our neighbors. Loudoun County would require a use permit for this use, and Prince William County's zoning ordinance is essentially the same as what ours is right now. And then there's a few other jurisdictions on here that are not our neighbors, which I can go over if you'd like. Or I can jump to the second question, which.
You don't have to answer the second question. That was just more of thought. No, thank you. This is good because I just wanted to make sure that I understood that we're not exactly leading the charge on this so much as we're sort of in the middle of the pack and or a little bit behind even. Thank you.
Do any of our neighboring jurisdictions or quasi-neighboring or generally in the vicinity have any sort of restrictions on how many residences could be near each other in a particular, again, I don't know how we would measure that, but does anybody do that?
The only one that we're aware of, and we only looked at Virginia, but Newport News does have an ordinance that requires a 5,000-foot separation between recovery residences. What we can say about Newport News's ordinance is that it predated the definition of recovery residence in Virginia code. So for a while, they were kind of quite ahead of their time. I think we've also determined that they don't have any in their jurisdiction. So it hasn't come up. I'm not sure what triggered it that many years ago, but they don't have any in their jurisdiction that they were able to tell us about. That was the only one with a difference.
Fair enough. I guess it's easy to restrict something if you have none of it. Thank you. Ms. Somerville, did you want to be recognized, or I thought you came off mute for a second. I may have been confused. No? Okay. Any other commissioners wishing to be heard on, we're not really doing topics, just anyone with feedback? Commissioner Weir.
I have a couple thoughts that most of which I'll save until we get closer to voting, but I do want to point out as a tangent that I think that this is another example of why and how the county needs to move toward more of a functional family approach for the ZO. I know that something like that has been on the work product for a few years, and it's hard to move it out of column B. But I think this is another example of why where we see a reliance on the strict no more than 4 unrelated persons. I mean, a family of 4 with, as we've been in the same meeting where we've talked about how a family of 4 with a foreign exchange student would be running afoul of the zoning code, right? Whereas you can have an entire block of nothing but families of 2 parents and 8 children, and any number of them could have any number of run-ins with the law, and it could become a very unsafe block. But because they're all related by blood, it's somehow not as bad as a family of 4 with a foreign exchange student. So I'm these comments are more toward the record than to staff, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Weir. Commissioner Streiner.
And so point of clarification regarding the number 8. Did I hear correctly that you had said that 8 is the sort of max that we have for a standard single family home here in the county? Or
8 is, so our definition, actually, I think I have a slide of that too. Our definition of family, our definition of family has 4 components to it, and 2 of them are ones that are mandated by state code, and that is 8 residents with, there you go, up to 8 residents with mental illness or intellectual disability or developmental disability residing with 1 or more resident staff, and then the one below it is a group of up to 8 infirm, aged, or disabled persons residing with 1 or more resident staff. So again, we were just sort of seeing this as a very, very similar use, were it not for the fact that the license versus the license for those 2 groups versus the certification for the recovery residents, it would fit in this definition.
Mm-hmm.
And as you saw in our comparative jurisdictions, there are 2 of our neighboring jurisdictions in Virginia whose zoning administrators have done that through interpretation.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I was getting more towards Commissioner Weir's comments because, let's just say like a normal house, with a family, and how many people can live in that? Is that 8 number, or is it higher? I'm not overly familiar with
the only other restriction in terms of a house would be what the restrictions under building code. Building code allows, just requires 70 square feet per bedroom, or if there are more than 1 person in the bedroom, an additional 50 feet per person.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. Yeah. So it's a little, yeah. So, okay. So that was my first question. And then the second point on that is that, does this sort of help with the 6 to 8 in these recovery residences? Does that help with the affordability of these people that are coming out of institutions or rehab centers, all that sort of thing, help them get back on their feet while still being self-sufficient?
I'm going to let Suzanne answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. Yes, it does. So generally speaking, the Oxford houses charge about $160 to $180 a week for folks, which is much less expensive than our folks can usually get first coming out of residential treatment and or if they're coming back from jail or prison. So it is an opportunity for them to stabilize in a sober living environment. They need to work in order to be able to pay for that for the most part. So the goal is to always get them stabilized and being a contributing member of the community as quickly as possible. I would say that most of the people that go into recovery residences don't intend to live there forever. It is kind of a stepping stone for them to then move into their own residence, whatever that might be. And to do that, they have to remain obviously sober and not using, not getting in any kind of legal trouble, and then obviously working and bringing in income.
Got it. So the 8 number, it's in line with the state code. It's in code. It's in line with a lot of other things, and it helps the people who would be moving in, get on their feet, which is the whole purpose. Can I have one more question? I just kind of thought of it while I was asking.
Yes, last
Make it
one,
quick.
and then we're gonna go to
Yes.
Commissioner Bagley.
And so on the sort of neighbors piece, does Alexandria, Fairfax, Falls Church, do they have any sort of staggering increase in the number of police activity, anything like that? We don't with what we have now, but do they?
So the city of Alexandria just adopted that amendment to their ordinance in July. We don't have any, we're not aware of any changes. That's not a very long period of time.
Mhm.
And we're not aware of a staggering crime rate in the city of Falls Church either.
Okay. So yeah, no major increase there. So that's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bagley?
Going back to the 8, and because of course I'm in residential real estate, so I know that there are things that we can and cannot do based on space. So when these come up for use for this, does that tie back to specific numbers with square footage so that 8 are not put into 2,000 square feet or 1,800 square feet or 1,200 square feet? Is there a specific number, square foot number that needs to happen there?
Yeah, I mean, again, that would be regulated under the building code, not the
So it's
zoning
the
ordinance.
same,
But
okay.
yeah, they would have to meet all of the life safety requirements under the zoning ordinance. That is part of Oxford houses. That's one of the things they do in citing a new house is making sure that it has enough bedrooms and enough space. It's also something, if this were to be adopted, if they wanted to establish the use under our zoning ordinance, they would have to apply for a certificate of occupancy. That would trigger both a zoning and a inspection services, which is our building department inspection.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
All right. So I do want to compliment staff on spelling out in your presentation tonight some of the things that troubled us the last time that this came up. I guess my lingering question is still about accountability on site. Am I under the impression that the house leader is responsible for kind of how things are going in the house? Is that correct?
I would say that there's multiple levels of accountability. And again, I'm going to let Suzanne probably speak more intelligently to that model. But what I will say is that when we spoke with Oxford House, when we reached out to them, when we started working on this amendment, they said that they would be happy to be in touch with residents. We had facilitated a meeting with them and some of the neighbors on the North Stewart Street properties so that they could hear directly from them about some of their concerns. They are first and foremost interested in being good neighbors. So if the Oxford House model is to give them some independence to kind of establish their own rules. But if they're not following these key tenets of the Oxford House model, then Oxford House will step in and make some changes. So, one example is when we met in that meeting, they indicated that on the North Stewart Street properties, they would ask those residents not to congregate on the front steps because it was causing concerns in the neighborhood. And so that's an area where they were willing to jump in because the house wasn't kind of managing themselves to the standards that they want to conduct to be good neighbors. And I'll let Suzanne jump in if there's.
You did a good job, Debbie. I will say that it is the model that, because it is peer-led, that the person who's designated as being in charge of the house is accountable, and they meet regularly with the outreach coordinator, who also comes to the house and does community meetings and check-ins. They have it set up that they can pull urine screens on people at any time to see if they're using. They, have methods that they do accountability, but they don't have anybody they don't have a assigned staff who lives there or is even there other than the community meetings.
No, I think that was helpful to hear that there is some structure. I think what I've heard since the last time that we've talked about this, and even in the original ZOCO meeting, really comes down to one of communication and how we need to improve it. And I think although this conversation for us has been laborious at times, it was a necessary one while while ZOCO has its specific role, which the end part of this is not. Approving or recommending approval of additional resources in a much needed environment without asking some of these questions is probably not, at least in my opinion, keeping in good faith with the community. And as someone who's been charged with planning, also isn't part of what I'm supposed to do either. So I really like on slide number 11, where you're talking about educating the staff. That's the first time that I think I've seen it in writing. I think we need to continue to push this further, and I'm very pleased to see DHS is on with us tonight. And that as we strive to improve the communications here, that we really need to facilitate as staff, also one that brings the neighbors in to make sure that all of these things are really being addressed as there are various pieces and puzzle things that may or may not. We shouldn't have to hear from residents that, they've asked these things repeatedly and there's no response. And as the residents have pointed out, they're very much in favor of having these types of resources available, just trying to make sure that they're running right, which was my concern as somebody here trying to make my best decision on behalf of everything I'm looking at. So if we could just push that even further, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess to kind of pull the thread on that slightly, with the facility where there were the problems, what was the time frame in which that ultimately was resolved? Or has it, would the community describe it as having been resolved?
It has not been resolved. I think you heard from Mr. Gargan, and he would definitely not describe it as having been resolved. The zoning complaint has also not been resolved. The reason for that is, and this complaint came in kind of late 2022. So it's, Mr. Gargan is accurate in describing that they've been complaining for 2 years. The complaint was based on having too many people in a single family house. They were cited with a zoning ordinance in violation, and in response, they submitted a reasonable accommodation request. Because they submitted the reasonable accommodation request, and staff has proposed that the means of meeting that reasonable accommodation is to amend the zoning ordinance. We can't resolve that complaint until the board acts on this proposed amendment.
You answered the question you thought I was asking, and I realized I didn't ask the question the way that I meant to ask it. So I'm going to rephrase it. I meant with regards to folks congregating in front of the home and such, and Oxford House facilitators or whomever having to step in because the house was not managing itself. That piece of it, how was that resolved?
I can't speak to that. I just only not beyond what Oxford House stated at the meeting.
Okay. I suspect that this is something that Ms. Somerville can also not address, and if Oxford House were here, they would be the right person to address that. But Ms. Somerville, anything you'd like to add to that, or is that? I mean, I'm not trying to make you the spokesperson for the facility. I'm just trying to get an answer.
No problem. I appreciate that. I can't give a definitive answer, but I will say that a number of the staff that I work with have been to the houses for various reasons. As we've indicated, a lot of the folks that reside in Oxford houses are connected to the Department of Human Services for treatment for substance use in particular. And so a lot of the staff that I actually oversee have been to the houses and have been checking on it and have reported that there has been discussions among the house about general behavior and making sure that they're trying to be good neighbors. So I think the message is definitely getting out there.
Okay, and if you'll indulge me one moment further, over what time frame would you put on sort of when this issue, the congregating and whatnot, was flagged to Oxford House powers that be, to you feeling like at this moment things are in a resolving place? What is the time span for that, if you could ballpark it?
Sure. We had a meeting with the homeowners association, and that was when it was brought up with Oxford House. And I'd say that was maybe 6 weeks ago. Debbie can probably help me with that more, or Cliff.
August 21st.
Thank you.
Just lost my slide. This is the full summary of outreach.
Okay. And I think since then, they had a meeting, the Oxford House staff had a meeting with the tenants and, you know, had a pretty direct conversation about concerns that were raised. And it's my understanding that things have gotten, that they've been doing better, or at least are aware of the issues.
Yeah, Commissioner, yes, thank you for responding to my questions. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Peterson.
Yeah, I'm just confused about there's an issue with people congregating on the front porch. Like if there's some fighting happening, that's one thing, but just a conversation about people on the front porch. I mean, we incentivize people to put front porches on their single family homes so that there is more of a community building, like people interacting with each other more. So I'm a little bit confused, like why they're being disincentivized, like why they're being, told not to hang out in their front yard when that potentially can give the opportunity for interacting better with the community and being better neighbors.
Yeah, this was again as part of that conversation. Mr. Gargan cited some of the concerns that the community had, one of which was that young women don't like to walk by the house because they're hearing whistles or things that make them uncomfortable. And so again, it was Oxford House stating that they do encourage the house to come up with their own rules. But if their rules are not working with the neighborhood, that is a big concern of theirs. And so it wasn't something that they would apply across the board, but it was something in response to comments that they received in this particular neighborhood.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I also just wanted to allude to Commissioner Sarley's point that, like, what is the role of our conversation in this specific issue as, discussing a change to zoning. And then just to point out, like, I have looked up, different studies about the number of people that are most appropriate for the success of a recovery house. And looking at one article in the National Library of Medicine on a government website, on U.S. government website, talks about like eight or more actually does increase the effectiveness of these houses. And so we can actually probably improve the neighborhood experience if we allow 8, because the home will be a more effective home for the residents, and that would increase the overall, community benefit that the house will provide. So I plan to support this. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Berkey, anyone after Commissioner Berkey wishing to be Commissioner Weir, and then I am going to move us towards motions.
I appreciate that. I'll make this brief, especially since I was not able to attend the September hearing. I do, I want to recognize the concerns that have been raised by our neighbors who've come tonight. So thank you for coming to the Planning Commission and those online. I really appreciate that it can be challenging, but also there are opportunities when you have new neighbors move to the neighborhood, right? And depending upon who those new neighbors are, it can go great, and sometimes it can be really challenging. And sometimes folks, aren't necessarily the greatest of neighbors, right? And that's really tough. And there are circumstances in which I could be unnerved myself, if I was walking by someplace and things were happening. That being said, I think we, as we've talked about, there are avenues for some of those issues to be addressed through. I think, we've talked about that at length. I also think there's something to be said for it. If you haven't done so, introduce yourself to your neighbors whenever you have a chance, right? I think that's always the best policy. But ultimately, I concur with, I think, the sentiment of most of my colleagues here. I think we have an obligation to consider the general public interest, which is everybody in our households of all different shapes and sizes and compositions, whatever that may be. And this is clearly something that we need to be looking at, both from a legal perspective as well as a social one. So I definitely will be casting a vote in favor with the recognition of the concerns that have been raised. And I think we always need to do a better job when it comes to, zoning enforcement, and then certainly things that could or could not implicate law enforcement. And then if I'll just speak to, there was a discussion about, whether, we really need 8, would we really just recommend 6? 4 is where we're at now. 8 is the request. I don't really see any basis to split the baby there and go with 6. To me, there's no analytical basis that would support that or would potentially even allay any of the concerns that have been raised. So in my view, I think we should go with the staff recommendation of up to 8. And that will be the conclusion of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Weir, and then I will recognize Commissioner Lantelmi, and then I really want motions.
Thanks. I share a lot of Commissioner Berkey's and Commissioner Peterson's sentiments. Fundamentally, I don't see a difference between Arlington and our neighbors in Alexandria or the city of Falls Church that would persuade me that there's a rational reason to distinguish ourselves from them in terms of the by right number of units. But I think more fundamentally, I think that this is, there are a couple of issues that have come before us tonight. One of them is a dispute between neighbors. One of them is an issue about whether or not people should be living in their front yards, but it's an issue of whether or not some of the people who are living in their front yards in the neighborhood are acting appropriately or even legally. It sounds to me like one of the neighbors, supported by a national organization and a state organization, is trying to do good work to resolve its failure to be fully neighborly. But more fundamentally, I don't see the zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan as a document to invoke to solve or dispute neighbor spats or to separate the good people from bad people. Like I don't see a rationale in the zoning ordinance or in the comprehensive plan to depart from the staff recommendation at any level, and that's where I will be coming down in the votes. Thank you.
Yeah, you'll remember last time this came before us, I was the one who made the motion to defer. I will not be making such a motion this time. I will be voting in favor of this for the reasons that my fellow commissioners have all noted. I absolutely understand the concerns of the neighbors, and they are valid. But as we have discussed here tonight, these are not zoning issues. They are enforcement issues. You could have just as easily a by right house with 4 frat brothers in it who have a cake party every Saturday. That would be just as obnoxious. And that's an enforcement issue, not a zoning issue. So, we have identified a number of avenues for the neighbors to be able to deal with this, to make their voices heard, to try to get these issues resolved. And I think that is the route to go. And because we have now waited the extra month, we've heard from the other commissions, have all been in favor of this. This brings us in line with our fellow jurisdictions. I think that it is something that I will now be able to vote in favor of and would recommend that the county board do so too. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantelmi. I think this has been a productive conversation. I do think that it's very helpful visually and otherwise for the information staff shared on sort of what our counterparts, peers, neighbors, what have you, are doing on this issue. And I do find what Commissioner Weir spoke well to it in indicating that I'm not sure what would make us different than some of our neighbors in the area. I think that this is ultimately, I've struggled a lot over the past month of sort of what is the role for zoning, for ZOCO and Planning Commission in this conversation. And I think that I still struggle with that a little bit. And the enforcement piece of it, I think, is not for this body to, make a determination on. I think that's largely how my other commissioners are feeling as well. I do think that is a fair conversation for the county board to weigh in on, because their purview is much grander than what we can, from a zoning perspective, take on as this body. I think that hearing from the community and, you know, the well thought out kind of concerns that we've heard is important for us to reflect on and understand. Ultimately, that does come down to an enforcement piece of it for me, and that's where I'm struggling, because it's not a zoning enforcement piece, it's a management of the facilities piece, and that's where my struggle still is. I am very curious to hear what the county board is ultimately going to do with this item when it does come before them, because as I've said, they have a much broader purview to weigh into more things than what I, in my view, as chair of this body, can weigh into from a zoning perspective. So I did want to say that, and I know that I asked us to move to a motion, but if anyone else would like to be recognized for final thoughts, or if someone is ready to make a motion, you know, we can head in that direction. I do appreciate staff coming back to us for a second month. We rarely make deferral motions. I think I can say that. We rarely make deferral motions. So it speaks to how seriously we took this matter. We did want to hear from our fellow commissions and understand better sort of the genesis of where the conversation was going. And I think that you've addressed those concerns tonight, and we appreciate the information that has been provided to us so that we can, you know, get to this point. Okay. Does anyone have a motion? Commissioner Steiner, are you
have it this
you
time.
have a motion this
I
time?
have it this time.
There you go. All right.
Okay. So I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board adopt the attached ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify Articles 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, and 18 of the Arlington County zoning ordinance to define recovery residence and allow as a residential use by right for 8 or fewer residents in one family detached dwellings and subject to use permit approval for more than 8 residents and or in other dwelling types.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Sarli will second that. I believe we've talked through this thoroughly, so I'm going to move us to a vote. Okay, hang on. Let me get my little yay nays going. Commissioner Steiner.
Aye.
Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Weir.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkey.
Aye.
Commissioner Sarli.
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger, aye as well. The motion does pass 8-0. We appreciate everyone's time on this matter and the community members who did come out for this. And thank you. Okay. I believe the third item on our agenda is PC business and organizational matters. Ooh, exciting stuff. So let's start with approval of the minutes, and then I know we have some different committees and such that need to weigh in and give some information. So we will do that in a moment. Thank you, Madam Clerk, for providing the minutes. Does anyone have any edits? Can we do this as a voice vote? Okay. Well, sorry, can I make the unanimous consent motion, or should someone else? I move that we accept the minutes from the September 4th meeting by unanimous consent. Everybody hearing nothing, the minutes are so approved. Current matters, CPHD. Who is speaking on that one? Oh, thank you.
Oh, are we at staff matters?
I don't know if we were at staff matters, or I think let's do current.
Whatever, it's our current matters, Matt, staff.
Okay, I can give a couple of updates.
You have the floor.
Sure.
Please talk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Pfeiffer with the Planning Division for the record. We have a couple of staffing updates. We do have 2 new planners on staff, Nori Flores in Comprehensive Planning and Curtis Roulette in Current Planning. And I think that concludes our updates for the month.
Sorry, these are new staff?
New staff.
New staff. Oh, great. Okay, we look forward to working with. We look forward to working with them. Thank you. And that was the full update from Mr. Pfeiffer. Okay.
That was full update. Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
Great. So let's go through and hear from the different subcommittees. And Commissioner Steiner, I know you are a representative on a new-ish group revamping the transportation master plan, correct?
Yes.
And you guys had a meeting. Tell us about it.
Yes, we did. So, and I circulated our notes as well as some of my comments initially on the transportation comprehensive plan amendment process. I'm not sure what the official title is, but that's what I'm going to call it for tonight. Really, largely that first meeting was introductory. I think we spent 10 minutes killing everybody's names. So it was one of those calls where we're outlining the scope of what we're going to do, how we're going to go about doing it. There were a lot of discussions about how information was going to be collected from different members of the community. Staff was pressing really hard for mail materials that would go to, they were saying, almost everyone in the county, requesting their feedback on what's important to them in terms of transportation in Arlington. They also stressed that they were going to be doing pop-up events, canvassing in neighborhoods that are not our typical demographic that come to us. So we are coming to them. Let's see. Additionally, there's a real emphasis on a sort of multimodal approach to this. It's not going to really be emphasizing one particular type of transportation in a given corridor. So giving availability for things like bikes, trains, and buses to sort of operate in the same part of town. I had questions regarding the sort of amendment process. This plan is being drawn up to be something that will be in effect for the next 20 years, that we're going to work on over the next 18 months. And I had pushed for this idea of providing maybe shorter term, sort of 5-year goals and targets that we can shoot to hit for, and then update those on a 5-year basis, because as you've heard me say many times, where I work across the river in the district, we have 5-year amendments to our transportation comprehensive plan over there, and that really helps us stay nimble. Because one of the downsides that staff was saying about the transportation plan in its current form is it's very out of date, it's too prescriptive, and so if we had a more flexible timeline for amending it rather than just waiting 20 years and just saying, okay, well, wherever we are in 20 years is wherever we are. So that was something that I had raised. But that's really the gist of it. Like I said, a lot of it was more of an introductory call and going over the scope of what we're going to do. Any questions?
Thank you. And what is there a planned cadence for these meetings?
You know, I'm not sure how frequent it's going to be. I think I was getting the idea that it was going to be every 1 or 2 months, I think is probably where it's going to be. But I'll let you know as I hear more.
Appreciate that. I believe Commissioner Weir had a question on that regard, and then we'll.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. I thought that I had seen a list of meeting dates. Maybe that was just months from that project. But is this plan also going to include changes to the map, the MTP map, or is it just the narrative-ish, for lack of a better word, component?
I do not know that off the top, but I will ask.
The contract calls for the contractor to provide a GPS layers for quite a number of items. So it sounds as though at minimum there is going to have to be some map that's going to result out of this. That's part of the deliverables.
That could potentially involve significant to material but not major policy changes too. Okay, so it'll be worth following along.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This is obviously this is Transportation Commission the other night too. It's a big deal. It's been way too long since the MTP's been updated, and there's an open period to submit, so all of you can go on and submit what you think the MTP is used for, what we use it for as a planning commission, and what you'd like to use it for, what it should be used for. So weigh in if you have ideas.
You said master transportation plan. Yes.
For the benefit of other colleagues, the reason I ask about the map is that, among other things, the MTP map includes streets that don't yet exist. Right, that as a matter of county policy and planning, we want to see come into being through the various tools and partnerships and whatnot, like Clark Bell Street, right? Is a very important street that does not yet exist in the form that we want it to exist. And hypothetically, I don't think anyone's going to suggest this, right? But changes to the map could hypothetically include removing Clark Bell Street from the map, and that would be disastrous. Now, I'm picking on that one because I'm fairly confident that it's not going anywhere, at least as far as the map is concerned. But I mean, this is when I talk about policy changes, it's because it's important, big deal stuff.
Well,
But these are all comments that you can raise in using the MTP and what you want to see and what you don't want to
Exactly.
see. So absolutely.
Exactly.
For example, we have the MTP right now has a couple of spots where streets are to go, but they're not prescribed where to go other than put streets in here. There's one in Virginia Square along Langston Boulevard where we're identifying that streets need to be here, but not prescribing where they will go.
Okay, so punchline. Everyone can make comments now into the master transportation plan on what we would like that to cover and how it's used. And we will be getting more frequent updates from Commissioner Streiner as our representative to the updating body for the master transportation plan. This will not be the only time we're discussing it. The way that the group is organized to sort of, report back to their various committees that have a seat in this process. We thought Commissioner Streiner would be a wonderful representative for Planning Commission in that role and to kind of share information back with us and get our feedback to what that process will look like. So expect to hear from Commissioner Streiner on this, lots more, probably at every one of our meetings.
Yep.
So thank you for taking this on, Commissioner Streiner.
Absolutely, yeah.
Appreciate that.
And if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to email me and I can
please.
relay
And
it on.
Email him directly because we don't want to create an inadvertent meeting over email. So yes. Okay. Anything from Zoco?
We have a meeting coming up, a joint LRPC Zoco meeting coming up on October 15th. I'm still trying to coordinate with Commissioner Patel to figure exactly the logistics, but the topics are, there's a study about daycare, that's the Zoco part, and then the LRPC part is the, I'm blanking out, taking buildings and repurposing them, and facilitating that process so that we can convert, let's say Amazon towers to residential towers and so on and so forth. October 15th, that's next Tuesday.
Thank you. That also sounds like that was the update also for LRPC. Anything else from LRPC or?
Just have a roster we need to approve.
Okay.
Other than that, no other reports at this point.
Okay. I don't believe there were any updates for one that I chair. I'm blanking on the initials for. Huh? PFRC. Yeah, no updates for PFRC, I don't believe. Right? Because that's going into, I believe the determination on that was we're putting a pause on that one until there's a project that actually requires it. Oh, so maybe that is the update. PFRC is going to be in sort of abeyance, so to speak, until there is another project that for which it's appropriate to have a PFRC in session. Since it wasn't meeting it, that didn't seem to, yeah. Okay, and SPRC.
I sent you all a list of our projects that we're working on currently. Thank you to Commissioners Berkey and Lentelme for taking on the Melwood SPRC. We do have 2 rosters that we need to approve tonight, so I'll do it by unanimous consent, hopefully. So colleagues, you received the proposed SPRC subgroup rosters for Melwood and Hotel Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of updates made to them since I sent you my email this weekend. So I think those went around this afternoon. So colleagues, Madam Chair, I ask for your unanimous consent in approving these rosters.
Is it just, I seek unanimous consent to approve the rosters. Hearing nothing, rosters are so approved.
That's it.
I'm just gonna go ahead and.
The LRPC
Yep.
roster, yes, please.
So I wasn't sure if we're gonna put it up, but it's no big deal. Giselle sent it around. So there's one LRPC roster for 6045 Wilson Boulevard. And so I will seek unanimous consent to approve that roster as well.
Unanimous consent, so granted by no one speaking against it. Great. Okay. Any other last topics? I just wanted to thank everyone. I think we had a really productive evening. We moved efficiently through the items, and I think we had substantive and useful discussion on both items and on the follow-on organizational business as well. So thank you all. This is our only meeting for the month. We stand adjourned until November. Thank y'all.
19 minutes early.
Sorry to leave you out here for so long.